Chapter 1. The Auction in Dust and Heat. The sun sat high over Dry Creek, bleeding the color out of the sky and baking the dirt street until it shimmered like a mirage. Heat waves rose from the rooftops, carrying with them the smell of horse sweat, whiskey, and dust. A crowd had gathered in front of the town's courthouse, boots scuffing the packed earth, murmurs weaving through the air like restless snakes. Clara May adjusted the brim of her straw hat, trying to shade her eyes from the glare. Her boots were worn, her skirt faded from years of work on the ranch, but she scraped together every last coin she had for this auction, not for pleasure. God knew she had no appetite for buying men like cattle, but because her ranch was on its knees and she needed strong hands before the fall roundup. The sheriff, a broad man with a belly like a rain barrel, stepped up onto the makeshift platform. "All right, folks," he barked, wiping sweat from his forehead with a kerchief. "These here men are working off their debts to the county. You buy their time, they work for you till the term's paid. No refunds, no complaints." The first two men went fast, one to the blacksmith, another to old Mrs. Talbot, who needed help mending fences. Then the sheriff's voice dropped an octave. "Next up, Colt McGraw." The murmuring crowd shifted, a few people stepping back as if the name itself carried heat. A tall figure stepped out from the courthouse shadow. He moved with a predator's ease despite the chains at his wrists. The first thing Clara noticed was the way the sunlight caught in his hair, dark, but glinting with copper where the light hit it. Then her eyes slid lower, to the sleeves of his rough shirt rolled to the elbow. That's when she saw it. A black inkbird stretched across the thick muscle of his forearm, wings spread wide, talons curled. The Black Vulture, a mark every rancher, outlaw, and lawman in 3 territories knew and feared. It was said that men who bore it had blood on their hands, more than could be washed clean. Colt's eyes swept over the crowd with a lazy sort of disdain, and for a moment they locked with hers. Something sharp flashed there. Not kindness, but not quite cruelty either. Just a warning. "Do I hear $10 to start?" the sheriff called. Silence. A few people shook their heads. A woman near Clara muttered, "Not worth a dime. Trouble follows that one." Clara's heart thudded. She could walk away, save her coins, hire a boy from town. But she remembered the sagging corral fence, the overgrown north pasture, the cattle that would be lost if she didn't have help. "10," she said. Her voice steadied though her throat felt dry. Heads turned. The sheriff looked surprised but pleased. "10. Do I hear 12? No answer. Even the blacksmith, who could use the strength, kept his arms folded. The sheriff shrugged. "Sold. To Miss Clara May Dawson for $10. Colt descended the platform slowly, the sheriff unlocking the shackles. The heavy iron dropped away with a clank, and Colt rubbed his wrists, his gaze never leaving her. She swallowed hard, lifting her chin. "You work for me now." His mouth curved, but it wasn't a smile. It was something sharper. "That right?" His voice was low, deep, with a drawl that felt like it dragged over gravel. "That's right," she said. "We leave in 10 minutes. Don't make me regret it." Colt's eyes lingered on her a heartbeat longer. Then he stepped past, the faint clink of his spurs punctuating each stride. He moved like a man who knew every inch of the ground and everyone on it, and feared none. From the edge of the crowd, an old prospector spat in the dirt. "Girl like you don't know what she's bought. That one's trouble all the way to the grave." Clara adjusted her hat again, watching Colt's back as he waited near her wagon. Maybe it was the heat, or maybe it was the way the wind had gone still when his name was called. But shiver ran through her despite the scorching sun. The Black Vulture was in her keeping now, and in the West, that could mean salvation or ruin. Chapter 2, The Ride Back to Trouble. The wagon wheels creaked in a slow rhythm, grinding over the ruts of the dirt road as Dry Creek faded into a haze behind them. The air shimmered with heat, and the only sound for miles was a steady clop of the mule's hooves and the distant, lazy call of a hawk circling high overhead. Clara May sat on the driver's bench, her hands tight on the reins. Beside her, Colt McGraw rode in silence, his long legs stretched out, one arm resting on the wagon rail. The chains were gone, but she could still feel the weight of them somehow, an invisible coil of danger that hadn't loosened. He hadn't said much since the auction, just a nod when she told him to climb up, and that same unreadable stare she couldn't shake from her mind. "You can talk, can't you?" she said finally, eyes on the horizon. His head tilted slightly, as if the question amused him. "When I got something worth saying," the drawl in his voice was slow, deliberate, the kind that could lull a person into forgetting there might be a blade behind the words. Clara's jaw tightened. "Well, I don't need small talk. Just work. The ranch is in bad shape." Colt didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled a match from his pocket, struck it against his boot heel, and lit a cigarette. The faint curl of smoke drifted toward her, carrying a smell sharp enough to sting her nose. "I noticed," he said at last, exhaling slow. "Corral sagged in like an old man's back. North pasture's overgrown. Looks like you're running alone." Her spine stiffened. "Not alone. I have my brother. Kid can't be more than 12. She shot him a quick glare. He pulls his weight. Colt's eyes lingered on her, steady and unreadable. "Not saying he don't. Just saying this land will eat you alive if you ain't got the muscle to keep it fed." Clara turned her gaze back to the road, her fingers flexing on the reins. She didn't need a stranger, especially one with a Black Vulture inked on his arm, telling her how to run her life. Still, his words sat heavy in her mind. They rode on in silence until the ranch came into view, a humble sprawl of weatherwood buildings, the main house's white paint peeling under the relentless sun. A few cattle grazed near the fence line, ribs showing from a lean season. Colt let out a low whistle. "You weren't kidding about bad shape." "Keep your opinions to yourself," Clara said sharply, though she could feel heat rising in her cheeks. When the wagon rattled to a stop in front of the barn, Colt hopped down, boots crunching in the dry dirt. He stretched, rolling his shoulders, and for the first time she saw the full size of him, broad to the chest, arms roped with muscle, the kind of man who would carry a hay bale like a sack of flour. "You sleep in the bunkhouse," Clara said, jerking her chin toward a squat building near the barn. "You eat when the work's done, not before. You step out of line, I'll haul you straight back to the sheriff." Colt's mouth quirked in something that might have been a smile, though there was no humor in his eyes. "Fair enough, boss." The way he said boss made the hair rise on the back of her neck, mocking, yet edged with something she couldn't name. As he walked toward the bunkhouse, she caught sight of him glancing over the horizon, scanning the land the way a man does when he's expecting company, and not the friendly kind. That night, after the sun had dipped behind the hills and the cicadas had begun their slow song, Clara stood on the porch, looking out over the darkening plains. The wind carried the faint scent of sage and something else. Smoke. She turned sharply, eyes narrowing toward the north pasture. No glow, no flicker of flame, but her gut tightened. Behind her, Colt's voice came from the shadows, low and almost too quiet to hear. "You don't know it yet, Clara May, but you just bought more trouble than you can handle." Chapter 3. Shadows of the Black Vulture. The days stretched long on the Dawson Ranch, the sun unrelenting, the work endless. Colt McGraw moved through it with a steady, calculated rhythm, mending the corral fence with sure, measured swings of the hammer, leading the cattle down to the creek without raising dust or riling them. Clara had to admit, at least to herself, that he was the best hand she'd ever seen. But that didn't change what she knew. A man with a Black Vulture tattoo didn't just have a past. He had enemies. She caught him once. shirt sleeves rolled high, arm flexing as he tightened a fence post. Her eyes lingered on the tattoo, the black wings spread wide, talons poised mid-strike, and she felt that same cold weight in her chest as the day she bought him. The stories came back in whispers. Men left hanging from cottonwood trees, ranches burned for refusing to pay, women disappearing without a trace. That evening, Clara rode into town for supplies. The feed store was warm with the smell of grain and leather, the wooden floor creaking under her boots. Two drovers leaned near the counter, voices low but sharp enough to catch her ear. "Swear to God I seen on his arm," one said. "A vulture, black as midnight. He's one of 'em." The other snorted. "Ain't knows about it. A man rides with the black vultures. He dies with 'em. Only way out's in the ground." Clara's hand tightened around the sack of nails she was holding. She forced herself to walk past without meeting their eyes. But the words burned to her mind all the way back to the ranch. When she returned, the sun was setting in a blaze of crimson and gold, the sky bleeding out over the horizon. Colt was in the barn, brushing down her mare with slow, steady strokes. The quiet was broken only by the mare's soft snort and the faint swish of the brush. "You been in town?" he asked without looking up. "Yes." She stepped inside, leaning against the doorframe, ran into a couple of drovers. "Let me guess," Colt said, his tone dry. "They told you I'm the devil in a man's skin." Clara hesitated. Something like that. Finally, he looked at her. His gaze was sharp, but there was no heat in it, just a steady, almost weary calm. "You want the truth?" "I'd settle for something that ain't a lie." He set the brush down and stepped closer, the dim lamplight glinting off the ink on his arm. "I rode with him. Long time ago. Thought I was tough. Thought I was mean. Found out they were meaner." "Why'd you leave?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Colt's jaw tightened. "Because one night, they put a torch to a family's home. Didn't care there were kids inside. I left before the roof fell in, and I never looked back. Trouble is, they don't take kindly to men who walk away." She wanted to ask more, but before she could, a sharp, panicked neigh split the air. Outside, her younger brother, Ben, was tangled in the lead rope of frightened gelding that had bolted from the corral. Clara ran, heart pounding, but Colt was already there. He moved like lightning, grabbing the rope with both hands and yanking hard, his boots digging into the dirt. The gelding fought, rearing high, but Colt's voice cut through the chaos, low, commanding, steady. The horse stilled, trembling under his grip. Ben scrambled free, wide-eyed. I'm fine, Clara." Colt handed the rope to her, his breathing calm, not a bead of sweat on him despite the struggle. "Your brother's lucky," he said quietly. "Luck runs out fast out here." For a moment, in the fading light, she saw something in his face that didn't match the stories. Something solid, steady, almost good. But then his eyes slid away, and the wall was back up. The coyotes started their mournful howls in the distance, and Clara knew one thing for certain. Whatever shadow Colt McGraw had brought with him, it was already stretching long over her land. Chapter 4, The Fire and the Fury. The moon was little more than a pale sliver in the sky that night, its light drowned by the heavy clouds rolling over plains. The Dawson Ranch lay quiet under the weight of darkness, the only sounds a soft creak of the windmill and the occasional restless snort from a barn. Clara couldn't sleep. Something in the air felt wrong. The wind had stilled, leaving the land holding its breath, and a faint smell, acrid, unnatural, slipped under her window. She was halfway down the stairs when she saw it, an orange flicker on the horizon, growing fast. "Fire," she whispered. A gunshot cracked outside. She yanked open the door just as Colt burst from the bunkhouse, shirt half-buttoned, rifle in hand. The glow from the north pasture was brighter now, flames licking at the dry grass, devouring it in hungry leaps. "They're here," he said, voice low and certain. Clara didn't have to ask who they were. They ran for the barn. Ben stumbled out in his nightshirt, wide-eyed, clutching his little .22 rifle. "Stay inside," Clara shouted, but Colt tossed the boy a look sharp enough to freeze him in place. "No time for arguing," Colt said, throwing a saddle over her mare. "They'll drive off the herd and burn the rest." The first riders came into view then, dark shapes cutting to firelight, faces masked, rifles glinting. The Black Vulture brand burned into their coats like a dare. Colt swung into the saddle, rifle across his lap. "Stay behind me, Clara." She ignored the order, loading her Winchester with quick, practiced movements. "I'm not letting you fight him alone." The gunfire started before she finished speaking. A bullet whined past her ear, and she ducked, heart pounding. Colt fired back, each shot deliberate, clean. His horse danced sideways under him, but his aim never wavered. The air was thick with smoke now, stinging her eyes and burning her throat. The north pasture fence was already down. 3 of her steers were stampeding into the night. "Go!" Colt barked, spurring his horse forward. She followed without thinking, the pounding of hooves drowning out everything else. They cut across the pasture, forcing 2 riders to veer off before they could reach the barn. Colt's rifle cracked again, and one rider dropped from his saddle with a shout. The others pulled back, circling. "They're not here for the cattle," Colt said between breaths. "They're here for me." "Then they can leave empty-handed," she shot back. The flames roared higher, heat blistering the air. Sparks leapt from the grass, swirling into the night like fireflies from hell. Colt swung down from his horse, grabbing a shovel from the fence. "Help me cut a break in the fire line." They worked side by side, hacking at the dry grass, beating back sparks. The fire's roar mixing with the yells of the gang. Twice, Clara saw riders closing in, and twice Colt's rifle sent them scattering. When the last of the flames near the barn died down, the vultures pulled back, their leader raising a hand in silent promise. Even from this distance, Clara could feel the weight of his gaze, a threat carved into the dark. Then they were gone, swallowed by the smoke and night. The silence that followed felt almost heavier than the fight itself. Colt leaned on the shovel, sweat and soot streaking his face. His chest rose and fell with deep, controlled breaths, but his eyes were still scanning the horizon. "You all right?" he asked, his voice softer now. Clara nodded, though her hand still trembled around the rifle. "You could have left when they came for you," she said quietly. Colt looked at her then, really looked, as if weighing something. "And leave you to burn?" He shook his head. "I don't walk away from my own anymore." The words settled deep in her chest, heavier than the smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a long, mournful cry that faded into the night. Clara knew the fire was out for now, but the real danger, that was still riding toward them. Chapter 5, Lines in Sand. Morning came slow, the kind of pale light that made the smoke from the night before it looked like ghosts drifting over pasture. The north fence was a charred skeleton, the ground blackened where the fire had licked it clean. Clara stood with her arms folded tight, the acrid scent still clinging to her clothes. Colt was already out in the field, shirt sleeves rolled, hammer swinging steady as he repaired what he could. Every strike echoed through the still air. Ben trailed behind him, gathering nails, watching his every move with wide-eyed admiration. A crunch of boots on gravel made Clara turn. Marshal Harlan stepped out from the road, his badge catching the early light. He was a hard man with a square jaw and eyes that never softened, not even when he smiled, if he ever smiled. "Mornin', Miss Dawson," he said, tipping his hat. His gaze slid to Colt. "I hear you had a bit of excitement last night." "You could call it that," Clara said carefully. The marshal's eyes narrowed. You know who those men were. I've got a guess. They were here for him. Harlan's voice was flat, certain. You keep McGraw on your land. You draw a line in the sand. And you'd best be ready to defend it. Clara felt her back stiffen. I can handle myself. Maybe, Harlan said. But trouble like his don't just visit once. It camps out, and when it comes back, it won't just burn a fence. It'll burn everything. Colt hadn't stopped working, but she knew he was listening. She saw the way his shoulders tensed, the pause in his hammer swing. When the marshal finally tipped his hat and left, Clara walked over to where Colt stood. You heard all that? Every word. And he straightened, eyes meeting hers. And he's right. Trouble's coming. Question is, are you going to send me packing or stand your ground? She opened her mouth, but before she could answer, Ben came running with a grin. Colt's showing me how to shoot proper. Colt gave her a half smile. Kid's got a steady hand. Just needs a bit of teaching. She wanted to be angry at him for dragging her brother into this. But the truth was, Ben needed to learn. And watching Colt crouch beside the boy, explaining the way of the rifle, the way his tone was patient and his hands careful, made something in her chest shift. Later, as the sun dipped low and the air turned gold, she found him sitting on the porch steps, cleaning his gun. Why did you leave them? She asked. He didn't look up. Because I finally saw what I was. What were you? Poison. His voice was low, heavy. They taught me how to kill without blinking. I walked away when I realized I'd become everything I used to hate. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the slow scrape of metal on cloth as he polished the barrel. Her throat tightened, but before she could speak again, the sharp crack of a rifle split the air. A bullet punched through the barn door with a splintering snap. Colt was on his feet before she could blink, pushing her down behind the porch rail. Stay down, he barked, eyes scanning the tree line. Another shot rang out, kicking up dirt inches from his boot. Ben's voice called from the barn, high and panicked. Clara. Colt's jaw clenched. Get to your brother. Now. She ran, heart pounding, as Colt stepped into the open, rifle raised, moving toward the shadows at the edge of the property. By the time she got Ben inside and turned back, Colt was gone, swallowed by the deepening dusk, chasing the danger head-on. Chapter 6. The Last Stand at Red Mesa. The morning broke red over the plains, the kind of dawn that seemed to bleed across the horizon. Claire stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching Colt saddle his horse with precision that told her this wasn't a day's work ride. This was a man riding into a fight he didn't plan on losing, or maybe didn't plan on coming back from. You're leaving, she said flatly. He didn't look at her. Vultures won't quit until one of us is dead. Better it's me meeting them than them coming back here. Her pulse quickened. So you think I'll just stay here and let you ride off to get yourself killed? His jaw worked. I think you've got a brother who needs you, and a ranch that'll burn if I don't end this. She stepped down into the yard, planting herself between him and the open gate. You're not going alone. A muscle jumped at his cheek. You don't even... I don't care what I don't know, she cut in, eyes fierce. I've seen enough. I'm not letting you face them without someone watching your back. They stared at each other for a long beat. Finally, he exhaled slow, shaking his head. You're stubborn as hell, you know that? Runs in the family, she said, swinging into her saddle before he could argue again. They rode hard toward Red Mesa, the land flattening into open scrub before rising into jagged sandstone ridges. The wind was dry, carried with it the faint metallic scent of the rocks baking under the morning sun. By the time they reached the mesa's base, the vultures were waiting. Half a dozen riders, their black wing emblems stitched into dust-stained coats. At their center sat a tall man with vulture ink from his wrist to his elbow, the ink fresh and dark. His grin was sharp and humorless. "McGraw," he called, voice carrying across the still air. "You should have stayed gone." Colt's tone was calm, but Clara felt the tension thrumming through him. "Should have stayed dead, Jace." The leader's smile vanished. "Kill him, and take the woman alive." The world erupted. Gunfire cracked, bullets whining off rock. Clara spurred her mare hard, firing from the saddle, the recoil biting into her shoulder. Colt's rifle barked beside her, each shot finding its mark with deadly precision. One vulture tumbled from his horse, another wheeled away, clutching his arm. They dismounted behind a boulder as the gang regrouped. Clara's breath came hard, the tang of gunpowder sharp in her nose. Colt crouched beside her, eyes scanning. "Stay low. If they flank us—" "I'm not hiding," she snapped, peering around a rock and firing again. A bullet smashed into the stone inches from her head, sending chips flying. Colt grabbed her by the collar, yanking her back. "You're going to get yourself killed." "And you think I just let you—" Her words died when she saw him flinch, a dark bloom spreading across his shirt. "Colt." He shook his head, reloading. "Ain't dead yet." Rage and fear surged through her in equal measure. She leaned out, picking her shots carefully. 2 more vultures went down. The rest hesitated, eyes darting toward their leader. Jace snarled, spurring forward. "Enough games." Colt rose, stepping into the open, rifle steady despite the blood soaking his side. "You want me, Jace? Come take me yourself." The 2 men faced each other, the air thick with the promise of death. Jace drew, too slow. Colt's shot rang out, the leader slumping in his saddle before tumbling to the dust. The remaining riders scattered like crows, vanishing into the heat-shimmering horizon. Clara was at Colt's side in seconds, slipping under his arm to take his weight. "Don't you dare pass out on me," she muttered, her voice shaking. He gave her a faint, pained smirk, bossy as ever. "Shut up and let me get you home." As they started the long ride back, Red Mesa stood behind them, silent witness to the end of the Black Vulture's reign, and the start of something neither of them could deny any longer. Chapter 7, Blood, Rain, and Reckoning. The sky broke open before they had made it halfway home. Dark clouds rolled over the plains like stampeding bison, the first fat drop splattering against Colt's blood-streaked shirt. Thunder cracked, close enough to rattle Clara's teeth. "Hold on," she urged, her voice tight as she kept one arm around his waist, the other on the reins. Colt's weight leaned heavy against her, but his grip on the saddle horn was still iron. "You always ride this fast?" he muttered, lips pale, but his eyes still sharp enough to meet hers. "Only when I'm hauling home stubborn fools who try to get themselves killed." He gave a faint huff, half laugh, half grunt of pain, as the rain thickened, soaking them to the bone. The muddy road blurred on the downpour, each hoofbeat splashing water-high. By the time the ranch came into view, the storm was a living thing. Wind tearing at the porch roof, lightning flashing in jagged white veins across the sky. Clara slid from her saddle, catching Colt as he tried to dismount. "Got it," he said through gritted teeth, but his knees buckled anyway. She slung his arm over her shoulders and half-dragged, half led him toward the house. Inside, the dim kitchen smelled of damp wood and wet earth. She lowered him into a chair by the table, her hands trembling as she fetched the whiskey, clean rags, and the sewing kit from the cupboard. Colt leaned back, his breath coming shallow. "Don't look so worried, boss. Bull went clean through." "Through or not, you're bleeding like a stuck hog," she said sharply, pulling his shirt open. The sight made her stomach clench, an angry wound just above his ribs, the skin around it slick with blood. He watched her, eyes dark in the lamplight. "You done this before?" "Twice." she admitted, threading the needle. Both times on my pa. And both times he swore like the devil. Guess I'll keep the tradition alive. She poured whiskey over the wound, and his jaw locked, a low growl escaping him. She didn't look up, focusing on each stitch, her fingers working fast but steady. The storm raged outside, but the only sounds inside were the steady drum of rain on the roof, the occasional rumble of thunder, and Colt's ragged breathing. When she tied off the last stitch, her hands lingered against the skin without thinking, warm under her fingertips, solid and alive. She realized she was holding her breath. Colt's voice was low when he spoke. "Why didn't you stay back at the ranch? You could have let me handle it." Her throat tightened. "Because you're not the only one who draws lines in the sand. This is my land, my family, and whether you like it or not, you're part of that now." Something flickered in his eyes then, something she'd never seen in him before. Not hardness, not wariness, something almost vulnerable. "You know," he murmured, "you're the only one who's ever looked at me and seen more than this." He glanced down at the Black Vulture tattoo. "Most folks see this and figure I'm already damned." She swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't just see more, Colt. I saw you." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then his hand came up, slow and deliberate, fingers brushing a damp strand of hair from her cheek. Careful Clara May. A man could start thinking he belonged somewhere. She managed a small, trembling smile. "Maybe you do." The rain outside softened to a steady patter, the storm easing, but inside, the air felt charged in a different way, something unspoken hanging between them, closer than it had ever been. Colt leaned back, closing his eyes, exhaustion finally winning. Clara sat beside him, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest, knowing the fight might be over for now. But the reckoning between them had only just begun. Chapter 8. The tattoo no longer feared. The weeks that followed passed in a different kind of quiet, the kind without gunfire in the night, without the smell of smoke on the wind. The Black Vultures were gone, buried at Red Mesa or scattered to the far reaches of the territory, and with them went the shadow that had hung over Clara's land. Colt healed slow, the stubborn kind of man who wouldn't stay in bed longer than necessary. By the second week, he was mending fence posts again, though Clara caught him pausing sometimes, one hand pressed absently to his ribs. Life crept back into the ranch. The grass grew thick from the spring rains, the cattle filled out, and even Ben seemed taller somehow, striding around with the rifle Colt had taught him to handle. But it was the way the townsfolk looked at Colt now that struck Clara most. No longer just the wary glances, the murmurs about his ink. Folks still noticed the Black Vulture tattoo, but now it carried a different weight. Less fear, more respect. They'd seen the man who'd fought for this land, not against it. One evening, the three of them rode into town for supplies. The saloon door swung open, spilling out laughter, clinking glasses, and the warm notes of fiddle. Conversation slowed when Colt walked in behind Clara, but it didn't stop. A few men even tipped their hats. "Looks like you've been promoted from outlaw to neighbor," she murmured as they walked out later, the sun dipping low behind the storefronts. "Don't know if I'm neighbor material," he said, glancing down at her with the ghost of a smile. "But I reckon it's a start." They rode back in that golden half-light, the prairies stretching wide on either side. By the time they reached the ranch, the horizon was burning with sunset, amber and scarlet, the sky so big it made you feel small. Clara slid from her saddle, leaving the reins loose. Colt stood beside her, the warm wind tugging at his shirt, carrying with it the scent of sage and dust. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked, trying to sound casual, though her heart was in her throat. "Every day," he admitted. Then, after a beat, "And every day I think about staying up." She turned toward him fully. "And what's keeping you here, Colt McGraw?" He studied her face in that way of his, quiet and unhurried, like he was memorizing it. Then his hand came up, callous fingers brushing her cheek. Maybe I finally found a place where I'm not just a mark on my skin. Her breath caught. And maybe, she said softly, I finally found a man who'll fight for something besides himself. They stood there, close enough she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, feel the heat of him in the cooling air. Somewhere out in the pasture, a coyote gave a long, low howl, as if marking the moment. Colt's hand slid to the back of her neck, drawing her in until the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. Clara Mae Dawson, he said, his voice rough. You've been trouble since the day you bought me. She smiled faintly. Then maybe I'll keep you. He kissed her then, slow, steady, the kind that felt like it carried the weight of all they'd been through. When they finally parted, the sun had dipped below the ridge, leaving the land bathed in the last wash of gold. Behind them, the ranch stood whole. Ahead, the open west stretched endless. And in that moment, neither of them needed to say it aloud. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The Black Vulture was still inked into Colt's skin, but here on this land, in her eyes, it was no longer something to fear. The sun bled gold and crimson across the wide plains, casting long shadows over the Dawson Ranch. The wind carried the dry, sweet scent of sagebrush, ruffling the manes of the horses in the corral. Somewhere far off, the faint hum of a saloon piano drifted on the breeze. Colt stood at the fence line, sleeves rolled, hat tipped low, watching the horizon like a man who'd spent too many years running from it. Claire stepped up beside him, her skirts brushing the dust, her eyes fixed on the same stretch of open land. It's quiet, she said softly. For now, he replied, the corner of his mouth twitching. But quiet ain't so bad, not when you got someone worth sharing it with. She turned to him, the fading sunlight catching the glint in her eyes. So are you staying? Colt took his time answering, like a man savoring the weight of the moment. Then he reached out, calloused hand closing gently around hers. I rode half my life looking for a place to belong. Turns out it was standing right here waiting for me. Her breath caught, and for the first time since the day she bought him at auction, she saw him unguarded. As the sky deepened indigo, they leaned together, their silhouettes framed against the endless west. You're home, Colt, she whispered. And I ain't leaving, he promised. The wind sighed through the grass, carrying their words out into the fading day. Two souls, scarred but whole, finally still under the same wide, open sky.